everyone, and welcome to Textile Talks. My name is Marin Hanson. I am from the International Quilt Museum, and I wanted to share a little bit of information about Textile Talks, as maybe some folks are still entering the Zoom room. Textile Talks features weekly presentations and panel discussions from the International Quilt Museum, Quilt Alliance, San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles, Studio Art Quilt Associates, and Surface Design Association. The programs are held online at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific on Wednesdays. Today, I have the honor of speaking with Christine Martens. We're going to be talking about collecting patchwork in Central Asia, but I also wanted to mention that next week, the National Quilt Museum will present a presentation titled Contemporary Curves by Audrey Essery. And as an attendee of today's Textile Talk, you will receive an email with a link to register for the program. And once again, you saw our video thanking our sponsors. So we want to make sure that you all remember to support them as well. We are very thankful for the sponsors who make Textile Talks possible. And we thank you as well. And you are supporting Textile Talk with your individual donations and by attending every week. We do have closed captioning available on today's talk. And if you have any questions during the program, we encourage you to type them into the Q&A function. We will do our best to leave some time at the end to answer as many questions as possible. So again, today's presentation is Collecting Patchwork in Central Asia, a discussion with Christine Martens. Before I introduce Chris, I wanted to just introduce you to the International Quilt Museum a little bit, to give you some context about today's talk. Today's talk is in relationship or in association with the current exhibition series we have on view at the International Quilt Museum, which is titled An Evolving Vision, the James Collection, 1997 to 2022. We are celebrating our 25th anniversary as a museum, and it's also the anniversary of the Artist and Robert James collection coming to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. That was what founded us as an organization. And one of the exhibitions that we produced in conjunction with our 25th anniversary is called New Horizons. And I curated this exhibition as a way to really feature our mission as a globally focused museum. The exhibition includes 21 objects from 19 different countries, which I hope reflects the fact that we have a collection of over 1,800 objects from outside the United States, and those come from over 60 different countries. So it's really a bit of our mission is to represent quilt making from all parts of the world, and one specific part of the world is what we'll be looking at today. And I just wanted to point out in this image, all those little red circles you see are part of our virtual tour that you can, it's sort of like a 3D tour that you can see on our website. And each one of those little red dots represents how you can zoom in on the label. So this is really like actually entering our gallery virtually. So make sure you go to our website and check that out. The part of the world we're looking at today or talking about today is Central Asia. And we have this map here to give you an idea of those different nations. We have Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. And those are all, of course, former Soviet republics. They're all independent nations now, but Central Asia has long been sort of a crossroads of the world. And it's such a rich part of the world for material culture and especially textiles. So this is the area we'll be concentrating on today to give you an idea of our collection in this part of the world. And we add on Turkey here as well, because we have a growing Turkish collection. But we do have over 150 pieces from Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Afghanistan, which is sometimes also considered part of Central Asia. We also have over 40 pieces from Turkey. And just to give you a few visual examples of the kinds of objects we have from Turkey and Central Asia, here's a beautiful block printed Turkish quilt, a patchwork hanging from Kyrgyzstan, a talismanic patchwork garment from Turkmenistan, and a quilted coat or robe from Uzbekistan. Now, we wouldn't have any of these objects in our collection if it weren't for our special guest today, Christine Martens, who I will now introduce. An artist and teacher for most of her professional career, Christine Martens has worked since 2002 as an independent researcher documenting and writing about textile traditions of Central Asia in relationship to women's rituals and ceremonies. In 2007-2008, she was a Fulbright Scholar in Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. In 2009, she received a grant from the Asian Cultural Council to document felt making and accompanying traditions in Mongolia for the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum. In 2013, she received an International Research and Exchanges Board, otherwise known as IREX, an award to document textiles and religious practices in Turkmenistan. And in 2014, she traveled to Xinjiang, China as an Asian Cultural Council Fellow with a focus on textiles and traditions. Since 2009, Chris has traveled to Central Asia on numerous International Quilt Museum sponsored research and acquisition trips, helping the museum build a world-class collection and contributing immeasurably to its understanding of quilts and patchwork as talismanic objects in Central Asian society. Chris received her MFA from the Tyler School of Art at Temple University and was on the visual arts faculty at the Spence School in New York for over 25 years. Prior to that, she taught at the New School for Social Research and Parsons School of Design. That's quite a resume, Chris. Thank you so much for being with us here today.
It's my pleasure to be here, Marin, as you know.
Yeah.
I love everything the museum stands for, and I'm so happy to be able to contribute whatever I can, whenever I can.
Well, we are more than grateful to you for helping us, as I said, understand this part of the world and its material culture.
I did want to mention that I noticed that someone sent a link saying they weren't able to see the map.
Oh, okay. We will maybe try to return to that at some point.
Okay.
And there will also be a recording of this discussion available on the YouTube channels of all of the participating organizations. So if they couldn't see the map now, they'll have a chance to see it later. Thank you for bringing that up. I thought we could start in Kyrgyzstan, but I know, Chris, that something you definitely wanted to mention and maybe start out with was talking about the landscape, the traditional life ways of the people in Central Asia, especially in relationship to nomadic lifestyles.
Mm-hmm. So I did want to mention at the beginning that it was, or it is, and has been the interaction between nomadic society, as you see here in Kyrgyzstan, and the sedentary or settled agricultural people, of Uzbekistan, of Tajikistan. So their interaction and melding and blending of forms and colors and motifs added up to really what we see today. It's not such a pure direction of each country, but it's a melding that we have to consider.
Right.
Oh, so you more about Kyrgyzstan. So Kyrgyzstan, in that first image, you saw a yurt in the middle of a field. and it was covered with felt, which is the way I first came to Kyrgyzstan in 2000. It was because of felt. And this is the structure of the nomadic home. And because the nomads built their homes themselves, they had much more of a profound relationship to home than we do today. And in the next slide, which is just a museum image of a museum in Urumqi, actually, in Northwest China, but it gives a good sense of what we call yurt furniture, which is all textiles. So it was the home, the domicile, which was in fact a woman's domain, that produced all of this, quote, yurt furniture, from sleeping pads to shelves that could hang from the trellis walls, to felt carpets, and usually all from material that was easy for them to obtain. Now, with the passage of time and people moving back and forth over the terrain more easily, of course, materials have become easier to obtain. But in this image of the yurt, and I keep looking to my right because I have a larger screen than the one with the camera, you can see on the back wall, the only furniture aside from this table that was planted there are two trunks. And that's still common in the yurt today. And they're called sunduks. And it's on top of these trunks, which are usually facing the entrance to the yurt, that all the valued possessions are placed. And they are the quilted sleeping mats, the quilted quilts, the quilted pillows, all of which are, for the most part, patchwork. Shelves that would hold things would also be made of fabric and hang from strings from the walls. So it's the domain that really guided the production of home furnishings, so to speak, within.
Right. And so as people became more settled, as cities or small towns or villages started to spring up, and we do have the next slide is of a woman, and I believe she lives in a built home, is that right? But what's
Yes.
the relationship to the yurt here?
Most people do live in built homes today, but many of them will go to the mountains in summer with their yurt or set up a yurt on their property for a celebration, a wedding, or a funeral. However, in the built homes, they still live very traditionally as they did in the yurt, with very little furniture. So most have a room with these trunks, as you see here, and all of the patchwork and quilts piled on top. And people still sleep on maybe 3 or 4 layers of quilts. Although with the arrival of the Russians also came these metal bedstands, which are more prominent in Kazakhstan and Mongolia.
And earlier you mentioned felt, how important felt is and how it originally brought you to Central Asia. So I think this photograph of this woman that you met is because she largely works in felt, isn't that right?
She works in everything. And
okay.
I noted yesterday in speaking to Marin that Roderick Kirikov would love the production of this woman, who is sadly no longer alive. But it was at midnight that I was arriving in this village with a friend. And before we went to the house where we were going to sleep, she said, "I want to show you something." And we opened the door, and I used a flash. So it looks very bright, but it was very dim with only this light hanging over her head. And her name is Upu Khan. And she uses only those fabrics that others discard. She doesn't make felt. She has never been to a museum. She has never been to the capital, Bishkek. This is in the lake region of Lake Issyk, in a village called Kizil-2. And so, next slide, please. Next image, please. Next image. Yeah. And so here she is on the left with, I don't know if you have seen traditional Kyrgyz carpets, but they have many of these motifs, but in a very orderly fashion. And she puts them together like a modern painter. So extraordinary. And on the right, she's standing in front of what we call tushkis, which is a large hanging, a large yurt hanging, in front of which the honored guests would sit when people are assembled to eat. And the richness of these pieces also denotes status, denote the wealth of the family, and of course the skill of the women or their forebears who made it. And she was skilled in all of these things. And one day I asked her, Upu Khan, when do you work? You know, like some workers work in the morning, some in the evening. She said, I work from the moment I rise until I go to sleep.
Wow, that's amazing.
So,
I love that story. So the tushki is a really important textile in Central Asian society.
and they're more often embroidered than they are patchwork.
Okay.
That was my second love before I moved on to quilts. It was first felt that I researched, and then I went back because I was so taken by these large scale embroideries, of which I have a huge collection that should go someplace one day soon. And then I met Mr. James, and
right.
the movement was in the direction of patchwork.
For which we are grateful. Now, this next slide shows that the raw materials for quilt making are available
Yes,
in many of the markets, right?
This is in Osh Bazaar on the left in Bishkek. And even though very few people are doing patchwork today, they are still making the covers to sit on and to lie on, but using the Chinese textiles that you see on the right in the market, which are, you know, like synthetic velvets, synthetic silks, et cetera, et cetera. I went to a beautiful wedding and I was so anxious to see, and it was in Osh, it was in the south, and I was anxious to see the bride's dowry. And they said, no one made anything, that everything was bought. So.
Well, now we are moving on to our next Central Asian nation in our little mini tour here, and this is Uzbekistan. What can you tell us about this woman that you met?
Well, I went to Khwarezm, which is actually on the border of Turkmenistan. It was before I was able to get into Turkmenistan, which is no easy feat unless you go with a group. And there's a wedding curtain in Kyrgyz. It's called koshego. I don't remember what it's called in Uzbek, but it's a large curtain, in this case, with a border and a plain field below, and behind which the bride stands at a certain part of the ceremony with her attendants, as everyone is sitting around and eating, and occasionally they'll lift the curtain and the bride will be seen. So in this part of the country, the top of the koshugo was patchwork. And so when this woman was told we were coming to see her, this was in Nukus, near the Aral Sea, she put up her wedding curtain, and these were her little refreshments, the teapot and the soda bottles, etc., that she laid out for us to partake of. And then she also wanted to show me everything she was able to do. So she was sewing, she was spinning, she was crocheting.
Wow.
This is a picture of her at the machine.
And this is pretty typical of Central Asian hospitality, correct?
It certainly is, yes. Even unexpected guests are treated like this.
Wow, amazing. We do have a photograph of a bride.
Ah, right. So, yes. And so actually here you see her dowry. It was a big dowry. And this was in Baisun, Boyson. And I didn't know why I was going exactly, but I had the opportunity to go for a few days. And so when I arrived, I learned that there was a wedding. And so, of course, we were invited to the wedding. And first, the wedding took place with everyone in traditional dress, and there was dancing and crying, and crying that the bride is leaving home, and the parents crying that they're losing her daughter. They always say, a daughter is only a guest in our home, because the daughter always goes to live in the home of her husband. So she had just come to the home of her husband. And this was an interesting little image, because I had read about this in Soviet anthropology journals, that a child would be put between, a boy child would be put between the legs of a bride to hopefully induce fertility and the birth of a boy's son.
Mhm. Okay. And the
the piece on the right is typical of the magnificent textiles of Uzbekistan. The wide border is a very beautiful old ikat, and I don't think we have a close-up of the interior patches, but some are embroidered. Some of the patches would be embroidered in the same pattern that it would be if it were patchwork.
right.
Some are velvet, some are silk, some are, there's just such a rich array of fabrics available. And it's often difficult to judge the age of a piece, because you don't know how long a beautiful, I said, small bolt of ikat might have been in someone's chest. So by the time they take it out and make something, let's say if it were in 1950, the piece might have been from 1900.
Wow.
So that makes age often difficult to judge.
Right. Right. So they hold on to those fabrics. They're that precious that they hold on to them for decades.
They're that precious, and fabrics are given as gifts also. They're given out even as funerals, at weddings. When I was thanking the woman who had been the chief curator at the National Museum in Turkmenistan, I didn't know what to get her. And then someone said, bring her not a bolt of fabric, you buy fabric in pieces that would be equal to what you would need for a long Turkmen dress. So that's always a great gift in Turkmenistan.
Okay. So if we have a chance to go, we'll know what to bring. Moving on to Tajikistan. I love this photograph on the left because it really shows the terrain of, I think people aren't always aware of what Central Asia looks like, but certainly it's varied. It's tremendously varied. Mountains, deserts, everything in between. So Tell us a little bit about what we're seeing here.
Well, I had no contacts really very direct contacts in Tajikistan. So one night I was at a friend's home for dinner in Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan, and my friend said, so-and-so is coming for dinner. And it was a man who lived in an Englishman, but he had lived in Central Asia for years and worked for Save the Children and was now living in Tajikistan. So I was sure to sit next to him at dinner, and I said, Terry, do you know anyone you might suggest as a driver in Tajikistan? He said, yes, absolutely. And he lived with a man in his home, in this man's home. And the man was a great driver, and he had a vast home outside of the city. So I said, great. So I made arrangements to travel with him that summer. I traveled with him actually for 2 summers. And he was indeed a great driver. However, I'm not sure where the cars came from, because this was a very difficult path. It's Afghanistan on the right, and we're navigating all the way down almost to the border of Afghanistan. And it was very mountainous. And so the car really didn't do well. And every time we came to a hill, the car overheated, and he would have to get out and take buckets of water and throw it on the engine and refill the radiator. So, and it was a very, very tedious trip, but really a very beautiful trip. And this was an area that was beset by war, during the Civil War. And we picked up many hitchhikers, if they were women, who had many tales to tell of the deprivation and difficulties they had endured for quite a few years, not that long ago.
Right. Well, and moving on, we have an older woman who must have seen lots in her lifetime. And you were telling me that the sewing machines you saw largely were set on the floor. Isn't that right?
Yes. I saw that in Turkmenistan as well.
Okay. So here
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I was going to say, I've spoken too much already, and I think we should probably move on because there's more to come.
Right, right. But she provides a good contrast to our next slide, where you met a woman who's actually working at an upright treadle machine. But this is a fantastic story about sort of generations.
Yeah, so we were in this region, and usually I have a string of contacts. I contact many people beforehand. I have names. I really didn't know where to go. So always my last resort or first resort is to go to the bazaar and find the oldest person I can find, talk to the oldest person I can find and ask some questions. So this woman looked like she filled the bill. And so we asked her, did she know anyone who was making quilts? And she said, yes. And so she wrote down the address for us and the name. We bought a little something from her, and we went to the address.
So that's the woman on the left.
That's the woman on the left. She's the woman in the bazaar. So we go to the address, and most houses, you don't see them from the street, but rather there's a wall outside and then a door that leads into a lovely courtyard. So we knocked and we walked in, and it looked like a building site. And we walked a little further, and we asked for the person on this piece of paper, and they said, oh, they died 10 years ago. However, on the second floor of a building that had no outer wall, I found this woman sewing patchwork.
Wow.
With her little granddaughter on the side. And she said she does things only on commission, and usually small rectangular pieces, what is what you use for, like their pillows aren't pillows like ours, like square pillows, but they're rather rectangular, and only the front face has the decoration, the embroidery or the patchwork. And the back is just an ordinary fabric. Because when you're sitting down and eating or lounging on a pile of mattresses, you can lean easily on these nice oblong pieces or a number of them. So that's what she was making. And I can't see if it's visible in the picture.
Yeah, you can tell that that is a long strip, and
Yeah.
that was on the front end or the decorative end of the quilt. So she only worked on commission. That's wonderful. And her daughter or her granddaughter, I just always have this hope that the granddaughter she's gazing at her grandmother so lovingly and with such interest. It gives me some kind of romantic hope that she too will learn how to make patchwork.
I must have a dozen photographs of her.
It's such a great image. Now, this next image also has young children in it. And these are, I think you told me they're Kyrgyz women, but living in Tajikistan.
So yes, the borders had years ago always been porous. So there were Kyrgyz in Tajikistan, there are Tajiks still today in Uzbekistan. The Tajiks speak a form of Persian, although everyone for the most part understands Russian, and most of the Tajiks understand Uzbek, Turkish language as well. But I had read about this village in an old book, that there were little patchwork flags that were placed on graves as with sort of an amuletic function. I think we might have written about that. I don't remember, Marin. So anyway, I did go to this graveyard and spoke to some people, and then they told me there were a lot of women with a lot of quilts. So we said, okay, we went to a large home and we said anyone who had anything that they were interested in showing us or selling, they should come. So we expected one or two people, and it was like a parade. They came with their babies, with armloads of quilts. And so the picture next to them shows them spreading out all of their quilts and patchwork.
I would have just been in heaven and just over the moon to see, all of these women bringing in their patchwork, knowing that they, or maybe their mothers or grandmothers, were the ones who made it. It's just fantastic. And then to see the next generation accompanying them. Now, this next one also has some children, some very cute children in it. But I thought this was interesting that this is sort of outdoor living.
Yeah, in many areas when it's possible. I know I've seen people doing it in Khiva. Many areas throughout Uzbekistan, even if they have a patio or if they have an outdoor area, when it's very hot in summer, they'll move their beds outside. And so that's what this family had done. But they had also erected an applique tushkis, which is the one that I spoke of as being hung in the yurt outside on the wall of their home, and then they all proudly wanted to pose in front of it
with some patchwork again on the ground in front of them. Earlier you mentioned wedding ceremonies, so here we're seeing a Tajik wedding with the curtain both down as well as pulled up to show the bride.
Right. I just wanted you to see what it looked like when it was in use. And it's not that it was patchwork. I don't even think that it was real embroidery, but it shows the border at the top and then the plain bottom. And this, however, is Tajik. The other one that I showed you was from the area of Nukus, near the Aral Sea.
And but
And then the one
returning,
on the right, you see how they have lifted up the curtain to show the bride who was behind.
right, right.
She sort of rests, like all the people, all of her guests are sitting and eating around this big tablecloth, and she is resting with her friends or attendants behind the curtain. And then every once in a while, she comes out, and she also does, there's something called the Kaleen Salam, often with a sort of a fan, but where she will bow in front of her audience, and that's called the bride's salam, or greeting. And maybe that's what she was doing there. I don't remember.
Okay. Returning to patchwork, and now this is fascinating to me that patchwork is used for a very, very specific domestic chore. Is this kind of that a woman would make for her dowry, or?
Yes, now this is something that I only read about. I did not meet any women who made them for their dowry or otherwise.
Okay.
However, this round object is what you would put the bread on before you slap it into the side of the tandoor oven. Usually these tandoor ovens, which are clay structures, right, are on top of the earth, and they're heated from below. But in this case, it was a Tajik village, and it was buried in the ground.
Wow.
But you can see that the bread is on top of, it's sort of blocked by our picture, so I can't see it myself. You know, on my screen, our picture is in front of
Right,
of the bread, but I think you can see that the flat bread is on top of a cushion.
yes.
And with that, and with protection to her arm, she will reach in and slap it against the side of the oven until it's finished baking. And so in years past, brides-to-be or their moms would make them an ornamental one. It's called a rafida. And there would also be a protective sleeve for the arm, which I've only seen ones that look like they're made of asbestos. But the next image shows a woman with one on her arm. And here is a close-up of them on the right. Unfortunately, I did not ask if I could buy those. They would have been great additions to the collection. But usually they would be made in a pair, the arm protector and the cushion for the bread, and the bride would use them for the first meal she made for her husband in their new home.
Okay. Well, speaking of brides and dowry traditions, marriage traditions, we are moving on to Turkmenistan, and I would love to hear more about this item or this textile called the kecebe.
Right, the kecebe, which is no longer in use, but would carry the bride and her retinue to the home of her husband. So there were often 3 or 4 of them. One would be for the bride and her mother. One would be for her relatives. One could be for friends, depending on how large this wedding party could be, and one for the food. And so this is an old image that you see here. And so in my mind, I kept thinking, oh my, I would really love to have one of those for the collection, but where do you go to look for one? So one day in the bowels of the National Museum, where I went often, I see this piece on the right. And I thought, oh my God, where did that come from? I thought that I had seen pretty much everything that they had down there. There was no system whatsoever. Things were stuffed into trunks and hung on hangers and no ventilation. And when I wanted to photograph something, I had to take it out side where there was a big driveway that led up to the street. And it was that driveway that the director would use to come down to park his car. So as soon as I would have something spread out nicely on sheets, they'd say, the director is coming. And I'd have to lift everything up, and he would come and I would start again. But in this case, I took it outside to the steps and I found an old garbage can, and I just placed it over the garbage can so I could photograph it. So I asked where they got it. And they said someone was trying to take it out of the country, and KGB found it at the airport, retrieved it, and gave it to the museum.
Wow, it's a fascinating story. And I am, at this point, you hadn't found one yet, but I am so glad that eventually you did find one that you were able to acquire on our behalf. And it's now, it has pride of place in our collection, and that's this piece. We'll see a photograph of it a little bit later, where in an exhibition installation. But I wanted to move on to the fact that you actually were able to attend a Turkmen wedding. And again, I love having these in situ photographs, because I mean, how starkly different from the photo you showed of Tajikistan on the Afghan border.
Right.
This is the Turkmen desert.
It's the Karakum Desert, and Turkmenistan is almost 90% desert, while Kyrgyzstan is almost 90% mountains.
Right.
And so a scholar I knew said he knew of someone who was going to a wedding in Damla, this village. Did I want to go? I said, of course. So we drove, and you can see these tire tracks. There were no roads. You had to use a GPS. And so we get to this village with this assortment of houses and a number of yurts. Next slide, next image.
Yep.
And I was taken to this first yurt on the left, which is where they said I would sleep. But I was a little unnerved when I saw all these men, but they did leave. They were just there during the day. But on the right is the bride. So when the bride appeared at the top of a sort of a dune, everybody rushed up in their cars to greet her, brought her down in her robe, which I couldn't show everything. But and then she was seated for over 24 hours in this room with only women, but sitting on a piece of patchwork. And so that's the point. That's what we're getting at with this whole wedding in the Karakum Desert. What was that a piece of patchwork was always a good omen and would ward off any jinns or evil sources that might be lurking. And so this is where she was planted for the entire time, with just her friends coming to offer her a little food or a little drink. And then the next day she would go out into the village and go from house to house to greet everyone.
Right. And speaking of those amuletic properties that you talked about, these are also some Turkmen garments only for children, and they serve a similar purpose. Isn't that right?
Yes, the children always, it was necessary to always have garments made out of patchwork, used as, or thought of as amuletic devices. And on top of this sort of poncho-like garment, this kurta, goes like a bib or kirlik on top. And there's also a small, I should find my pointer, but I seem to have lost it, a small white triangle. And that's either full of salt or a verse from the Quran and other little silver amulets that punctuate the patchwork.
And now the repeating triangle has great significance as well, correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
The repeating triangle, the tumar?
The triangle the triangle is always thought of as an amulet. Yes.
Mhm. Right. And so having on the kurta on the left, having that whole row of them, I imagine is giving the child all the protection possible.
Or, I mean, I saw a woman just with a chain around her neck, and on the very back, there was a little tiny stuffed triangle. There are those places where evil spirits can enter more readily. And
Right.
so it would be from the back of the neck where one doesn't expect, or maybe on the head, or the arms, or places where there are openings in the body.
Right. Okay, well that we've sort of concluded our tour of Central Asia, and as you've been talking about, we've seen that patchwork really is so very important in Central Asia. We don't have a lot of time left today, but we have a few slides that I'm hoping we can go through very quickly in talking about Turkey, which is another place that you have a great deal of experience and you have helped us build our collection. And so I wanted to sort of contrast between patchwork in Central Asia and quilted textiles in Turkey. So Chris, I'm hoping we can cover Turkey very, very quickly. What is this slide communicate?
Yeah, so this is from a book called the Surname, which is the book of festivities of Mehmet III, commemorating the circumcision of the Crown Prince Mehmet in 1582 in Istanbul. And he is sitting outside the palace, looking down at a parade of craftsmen. So this is the parade of the quilt makers, the yorgancıs. Yorgan is the word for quilt. It's a much longer story, which maybe we will be able to write about when we do our exhibition. But guilds were certainly important and still are to some extent, much lesser extent, in Turkey.
And here is a photograph where you discovered that there was still a guild, a Yorgancı
Yes,
guild.
so I was walking through Kapılı Çarşı, the Grand Bazaar, and I saw this stairway leading up, and I didn't understand what the rest said at the time. It was also carpets and etc. But when I saw Yorgancı, oh my goodness! So let me go up and investigate that. So I did find that there was still a guild, and I couldn't talk to the man, so I called my friend Suhandan in Izmir and had her translate. And I said, "Are there any in the bazaar?" And so he understood what I was looking for, and he took me to, you've been to Istanbul, there's the main first floor where everyone goes. Then there's a second floor, and then there's a third floor. And so the third floor is where this yorgan maker or yorgancı was working. And these are the typical Turkish quilts that you ubiquitous everywhere, filled with the same cotton you saw in Kyrgyzstan, but then hand quilted according to patterns. And then there are pattern books. So one would choose one's pattern, and you can see the ones hanging, the melon color and the lavender, and how they're different patterns.
Just gorgeous. I just think they're fantastic. And I mean, they're so shiny and just sort of kind of over the top. I think they're great.
I really disliked them when I first saw them 20 years ago, or maybe 30 years ago. I thought that they were, I mean, I had no appreciation for them whatsoever. But it took a long time for me to come around, and I have to always remind myself not to, don't be elitist about things. Investigate everything.
That's right.
And so in the next image.
Yeah. We'll need to cover these pretty quickly, Chris, because we want to
Okay,
leave some
all of a
time.
sudden I saw these feet coming down, And there was a guy working up in the attic of this third floor. And he had been an apprentice there years ago. And he said when the place was run like a boot camp, you would be able to sleep there and work, and you would receive your mat to sleep on and food for the day. And that's how he learned.
Wow.
And I think we have to stop there.
Yep. We just have a couple more images of one of Turkey. And here is an exhibition photograph when Chris was our guest curator for an exhibition called Sacred Scraps. And you can see there Chris was earlier talking about the pillows with patchwork or embroidery on the decorative end. And that photo on the right shows a whole stack, 2 stacks of some of the pillows. And then on the left is the kecabe, the palanquin, the wedding bridal palanquin cover that we installed as well. And before we move on to questions, I did just want to let people know that Chris does lead tours to Uzbekistan. If you're interested in learning more about the tours she gives, she's giving one next May. I have her email address here. So we wanted to close by just mentioning the fact that she continues to travel to Central Asia. She continues to help us build our collection. And if you're interested in learning more about it, that's how you can contact her. So I think we're ready for Q&A, and Martha Seelman of Sakwa has very kindly agreed to be our Q&A wrangler. We have, looks like about 7 minutes.
All right. I want to echo something that popped up several times in the chat, which is how much our audience and I really appreciated being able to have this virtual tour of a part of the world about which we know nothing, and that is just so rich and interesting. And everybody, wants to just thank you, Chris and Marin, for sharing what you have learned. So the first set of questions, Chris, is how did you get involved in doing this kind of travel and research? How many languages do you speak? Do you work with an interpreter? How do you deal with traveling in parts of the world where you don't have European or American style hotels?
Where do I start? At the beginning?
Yeah, how did you get started?
So I was teaching felt making without being a very knowledgeable felt maker. And I would call, many of you might know Jory Johnson. She's like one of the best in the world from Kyoto. And I would talk to her in the morning or in the evening before I had something new to present. And anyway, then I decided I have always traveled a lot since I'm 20. And so I thought, well, I should go to Turkey and I should document felt making. So through my textile network, I found a felt maker in Konya, Mehmet Girgic, who anyone who knows anything about felt knows him for many years. And for some reason, he let me attach myself to him for 10 days. And I just documented everything that he did. And so I thought, oh, I know everything about felt now, right, after 10 days. And so then I saw there was a felt symposium in Kyrgyzstan. And so I had felt on the brain. And I wrote a little article for Holly. I had never done that before. I was a practicing artist until that point. And so I applied to go to the symposium, and they said, can you present? And I thought, of course, like I'm now an expert in Turkish felt. So really chutzpah, but I had good images. And so that was my first trip to Kyrgyzstan in 2000, and where I met a lot of my lifelong friends, actually. And the next year I went back, and I also went to Uzbekistan. And so that was part of the Uzbekistan journey. And then my friend in Kyrgyzstan said, why didn't you apply for a grant? I only had gotten artists grants. I didn't know about these other things. So she said, apply for, I don't know what she said, an IREX, I think first. Well, anyway, apply for IREX or Fulbright a couple of times before, but I didn't know what I was doing. And my children said, Mom, ask for the jurors' comments. Anyway, I learned how to write a grant, but meanwhile, I was learning more about these countries and the people by going every summer. And then I thought I should also start to learn Russian. And so I did study Russian for 4 or 5 years, but it was at night, once a week, while I was working. So I knew a lot. And then once I got the Fulbright, which is my first grant, I did study for a summer in St. Petersburg, and I studied at Columbia. So for all the studying I did in Russian, I should be writing books, but really I remember, unfortunately, very little. I can, make out things and I can sort of translate some things, but most people now are speaking English, or there are English speaking people around. And the hotels are fine, by the way.
Well, good, because certainly your photos show no roads and maybe a military truck or a couple of horses. And that's a very brave type of traveling. I've got time for just 1 or 2 quick questions. A lot of people wanted to know about the sewing machines that you showed. Are some of them may be electric, but I'm sure there are places where there is no electricity for sewing machines, and so they're treadle. And they wanted to know, how do you work a sewing machine if you're sitting on the floor?
I have never, no. And I was floored to see what they were able to turn out sitting on the floor. I even doubted my ability to use a treadle machine, to use I guess my first machine, you used your knee against the side.
Oh, interesting. And then the other question, a technical question, has to do with the colors. Are the people that you are meeting mostly using natural dyes?
No one.
Vegetable dyes, or they're all being done commercially?
Practically no one is using vegetable dyes. I know that Aziz Murtazayev, who we visit each year, who also was at Santa Fe Folk Art Market, has some of his production in natural dyes. I know Medina Kasambayeva, an embroiderer in Uzbekistan. She uses all natural dyes, but for the most part, people are using chemical dyes.
Okay. And we're running out of time. Everybody wants to know how they can learn more.
I do have a reading list that I send to people on my tour. I can share that, or let me say Susan Meller, Meller.
Okay.
Marin helped me with the book is called Cotton and Silk.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And it's
also,
memories of a Central Asia that was, or something like that. But all the things that you will still find in the bazaar. Google Susan Meller, Meller. She also wrote in.
Chris, I think this is going to have to be the last thing, but I do want to plug the fact that on the International Quilt Museum website, you can go to our World Quilts website. It's worldquilts.quiltstudy.org. You can find a link to it on our homepage, and we have an entire module about Central Asian textiles. It's a great place to start. You can find the Susan Meller book, everything. So thank you so much, Chris, for being part of our talk today.
And thank you, everybody, for being here. Please join us again next week when we'll be hearing from the National Quilt Museum about their exhibition of Audrey Essery's work. And if you enjoy Textile Talks, please consider making a donation to help fund the production. Thank you so much. This was fascinating. Chris and Marin, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with all of us. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Martha. Bye, everybody.